The moment is upon us. Kairos has arrived. Hello and welcome everybody to Humanity's Contempt. Today we will be continuing on with our audiobook recording of Frankenstein, beginning back with chapter 14, hopefully getting quite a bit towards the end of it, maybe into the 200s today. We'll see how time goes on, and thankfully, as the title implies, we'll be continuing on with Amnesia. It's just such a compelling story as I've experienced it, and as I've learned a little bit more about the background. But that brings us swiftly on into our housekeeping per the usual. To begin with, the weather has been changing quite a bit. We have been going through, as ever it would seem for this past month, snap from well below freezing to fairly well above. But that's neither here nor there. We will be endeavoring to overcome as always. Aside from that, there are no new updates about the channel. Things are going smoothly as ever. But in the Discord, a little bit of just a little touch on affairs going on over there. We have had a little bit more interesting conversation. For those of you who are inclined towards all things of physics, philosophy, mathematics, this kind of thing, we have had a very interesting discussion with quite a few open-ended questions that have been started over there, and I would highly suggest anybody who wishes to see what it's about maybe participate in it, if any of that appeals to you whatsoever, to head down to the link in the description. And that is not just a shameless plug to start off the stream with. It is a genuine suggestion and offer for anybody who might have any familiarity with the topics, because I think there's some very important ones, and at least for myself, I have not found any answers to the queries thereabouts, but maybe you can offer some suggestions. Besides that, I think it's time to get over to the audiobook recording. So, let us continue with our customs as ever. Frankenstein, Part 5. Recorded by, well, I think that we're going with narrated by, or read by, yes. Read by Kairos, of the Threefold Manifold. February 25th, 2025. Chapter 14. Some time elapsed before I learned the history of my friends. It was one which could not fail to impress itself deeply on my mind, unfolding as it did a number of circumstances. I think I actually skipped a little bit of the intonation in the beginning. Let's try that back again. Some time elapsed before I learned the history of my friends. That's where we should be. It was one which could not fail to impress itself deeply on my mind, unfolding as it did a number of circumstances, each interesting and wonderful to one so utterly inexperienced as I was. The name of the old man was De Lacy. He was descended from a good family in France, where he had lived for many years in affluence, respected by his superiors, and beloved by his equals. His son was bred in the service of his country, and Agatha had ranked with ladies of the highest distinction. A few months before my arrival, they had lived in a large and luxurious city called Paris, surrounded by friends, and possessed of every enjoyment which virtue, refinement of intellect, or taste accompanied by a moderate fortune could afford. The father of Safi had been the cause of their ruin. He was a Turkish merchant who had inhabited Paris for many years, when, for some reason which I could not learn, he became obnoxious to the government. He was seized and cast into prison on the very day that Safi arrived from Constantinople to join him. He was tried and condemned to death. The injustice of his sentence was very flagrant. All Paris was indignant, and it was judged that his religion and wealth, rather than the crime alleged against him, had been the cause of his condemnation. Felix had accidentally been present at the trial. His horror and indignation were uncontrollable when he heard the decision of the court. He made, at that moment, a solemn vow to deliver him, and then looked around for the means. After many fruitless attempts to gain admittance to the prison, he found a strongly grated window in an unguarded part of the building, which lighted the dungeon of the unfortunate Mahometan. That's probably a mispronunciation. Let's quickly look that up. I think that this is the only book that I've had to look up this many different pronunciations for. Well, that's an interesting way to spell that. And not at a bad time as a car passes by. Hmm. Mahometan, apparently. We'll run with that. After many fruitless attempts to gain admittance to the prison, he found a strongly grated window in an unguarded part of the building, which lighted the dungeon of the unfortunate Mahometan, who, loaded with chains, waited in despair the execution of the barbarous sentence. Felix visited the grate at night and made known to the prisoner his intentions in his favor. The Turk, amazed and delighted, endeavored to kindle the zeal of his deliverer by promises of reward and wealth. Felix rejected his offers with contempt, yet when he saw the lovely Safi, who was allowed to visit her father, and who, by her gestures, expressed her lively gratitude, the youth could not help owning to his own mind that the captive possessed a treasure which would fully reward his toil and hazard. The Turk quickly perceived the impression that his daughter had made on the heart of Felix, and endeavored to secure him more entirely in his interests by the promise of her hand in marriage. so soon as he should be conveyed to a place of safety. Felix was too delicate to accept this offer, yet Felix was too delicate to accept this offer, yet he looked forward to the probability of the event as to the consummation of his happiness. During the ensuing days, while the preparations were going forward for the escape of the merchant, the zeal of Felix was warmed by several letters that he received from this lovely girl, who found means to express her thoughts in the language of her lover by the aid of an old man, a servant of her father, who understood French. She thanked him in the most ardent terms for his intended services towards her parent, and at the same time she gently deplored her own fate. I have copies of these letters, for I found means during my residence in the hovel to procure the implements of writing, and the letters were often in the hands of Felix or Agatha. Before I depart, I will give them to you. They will prove the truth of my tale, but at present, as the sun is already far declined, I shall only have time to repeat the substance of them to you. Safi related that her mother was a Christian Arab, seized and made a slave by the Turks, recommended by her beauty. And there's the first hitch. Oof. Oof. Recommended by her beauty, she had won the heart of the father of Safi, who married her. The young girl spoke in high and enthusiastic terms of her mother, who, born in freedom, spurned the bondage to which she was now reduced. Spurned the bondage to which she was now reduced. She instructed her daughter in the tenets of her religion, and taught her to aspire to higher powers of intellect and an independence of spirit forbidden to the female followers. Forbidden to the female followers of I almost said Bahamut. Crazy. Forbidden to the female followers of Mahomet. This lady died. This lady died, but her lessons were indelibly impressed on the mind of Safi, who, sickened at the prospect of again returning to Asia and being immured within the walls of a harem, allowed only to occupy herself with infantile amusements ill-suited to the temper of her soul, now accustomed to grand ideas and a noble emulation for virtue. The prospect of marrying a Christian and remaining in a country where women were allowed to take rank in society was enchanting to her. The day of the execution of the Turk was fixed, but on the night previous to it, he quitted his prison and before morning was distant many leagues from Paris. Felix had procured passports in the name of his father, sister, and himself. He had previously communicated his plan to the former, who aided the deceit by quitting his house under the pretense of a journey. I see it's a busy morning. Or I should say, deep evening. He had previously communicated his plan to the former, who aided the deceit by quitting his house under the pretense of a journey, and concealed himself with his daughter in an obscure part of Paris. Felix conducted the fugitives through France to Lyon. He probably would pronounce it properly. Felix conducted the fugitives through France to Lyon and across Mont-Cenis to Leghorn, where the merchant had decided to wait a favorable opportunity of passing into some part of the Turkish dominions. Safi resolved to remain with her father until the moment of his departure, before which time the Turk renewed his promise that she should be united to his deliverer, and Felix remained with them in expectation of that event. And in the meantime, he enjoyed the society of the Arabian, who exhibited towards him the simplest and tenderest affection. They conversed with one another through the means of an interpreter, and sometimes with the interpretation of looks, and Safi sang to him the divine airs of her native country. The Turk allowed this intimacy to take place, and encouraged the hopes of the youthful lovers, while in his heart he had formed far other plans. He loathed the idea that his daughter should be united to a Christian, but he feared the resentment of Felix if he should appear lukewarm, for he... Cars, man. And a loud one this time. He loathed the idea that his daughter should be united to a Christian, but he feared the resentment of Felix if he should appear lukewarm, for he knew that he was still in the power of his deliverer, if he should choose to betray him to the Italian state which they inhabited. He resolved 1,000 plans by which he should be enabled to prolong the deceit until it might no longer be necessary, and secretly to take his daughter with him when he departed. His plans were facilitated by the news which arrived from Paris. The government of France were greatly enraged at the escape of their victim, and spared no pains to detect and punish his deliverer. The plot of Felix was quickly discovered, and De Lacy and Agatha were thrown into prison. The news reached Felix and roused him from his dream of pleasure. His blind and aged father and his gentle sister lay in a noisome dungeon, while he enjoyed the free air and the society of her whom he loved. This idea was torture to him. He quickly arranged with the Turks that if the latter should find a favorable opportunity for escape before Felix could return to Italy, Safi should remain as a boarder at a Safi should remain as a boarder at a convent in Leghorn, and then, quitting the lovely Arabian, he hastened to Paris and delivered himself up to the vengeance of the law, hoping to free De Lacy and Agatha by this proceeding. Oh, just in time for another car. It'll pass sometime soon, I'm sure. And sooner than expected. All right. He did not succeed. They remained confined for 5 months before the trial took place, the result of which deprived them of their fortune and condemned them to a perpetual exile from their native country. They found a miserable asylum in the cottage in Germany, where I discovered them. Felix soon learned that the treacherous Turk, for whom he and his family endured such unheard-of oppression, on discovering that his deliverer was thus reduced to poverty and ruin, became a traitor to good feeling and honor, and had quitted Italy with his daughter, insultingly sending Felix a pittance of money to aid him, as he said, in some plan of future maintenance. In some plan of future maintenance. Such were the events that preyed on the heart of Felix and rendered him, when I first saw him, the most miserable of his family. He could have endured poverty, and while this distress had been the meed of his virtue, he gloried in it. But the ingratitude of the Turk and the loss of his beloved Safi were misfortunes more bitter and irreparable. The arrival of the Arabian now infused new life into his soul. When the news reached Leghorn, that Felix was deprived of his wealth and rank, the merchant commanded his daughter to think no more of her lover, but to prepare to return to her native country. The generous nature of Safi was outraged by this command. She attempted to expostulate with her father, but he left her angrily, reiterating his tyrannical mandate. A few days after, the Turk entered his daughter's apartment and told her hastily that he had reason to believe that his residence at Leghorn had been divulged, and that he should speedily be delivered up to the French government. He had consequently hired a vessel to convey him to Constantinople, for which city he should sail in a few hours. He intended to leave his daughter under the care of a confidential servant, to follow at her leisure with the greater part of his property, which had not yet arrived at Leghorn. When alone, Safie resolved in her own mind the plan of conduct that it would become her to pursue in this emergency. A residence in Turkey was abhorrent to her. Her religion and her feelings were alike adverse to it. By some papers of her father, which fell into her hands, she heard of the exile of her lover, and learnt the name of the spot where he then resided. She hesitated some time, but at length she formed her determination. Taking with her some jewels that belonged to her father, and a sum of money, she quitted Italy with an attendant, a native of Leghorn, but who understood the common language of Turkey, and departed for Germany. She arrived in safety at a town about 20 leagues from the cottage of de Lacy, when her attendant fell dangerously ill. Safie nursed her with the most devoted affection, but the poor girl died, and the Arabian was left alone, unacquainted with the language of the country, and utterly ignorant of the customs of the world. She fell, however, into good hands. The Italian had mentioned the name of the spot for which they were bound, and, after her death, the woman of the house in which they had lived took care that Safie should arrive in safety at the cottage of her lover. Chapter 14, I should say. For those who might be new watching, this is the recap and response portion, as well as where, if there is any chat to the side, I'll engage with that and respond at the earliest availability. Chapter 14 tells the story of Frankenstein's monster, not only in his own journeys, but becoming intimately familiar with those of Safie, those of Felix, of Agatha, and the old man, father, who we now know as de Lacy. Not just in the monster's familiarization with his own inner world, his own feelings, his own position, but that of his friends, as he would wish to call them. Those which he has grown attached to, and so comes to understand, to sympathize and empathize, to know feeling beyond himself. And now, insofar as the response, I think we very much covered the matter of intimacy in other responses, but that is the prime focus of this. Let's see. Really, it would just be a repetition, at least in the philosophic sense. But the structure, the structure. I think there's something there. Well, let's refresh for a moment while we think about it. Chapter 14. Chapter 14 conveys, well, we use conveys an awful lot. Let's use a synonym. Chapter 14 demonstrates intimacy at its apex. The continual progression from the first person narrative to the second, and finally into the third. Of Frankenstein's monster not only as agent of himself, but agent as narrator, and finally agent as understander. One who is able to grant perspective from all participant parties. Much in a similar fashion as to how Mr. Seville in his letters, and another vehicle, and good. Much as Mr. Seville, I guess it would be Saville, much as Mr. Saville in his letters relays to his sister not only his own journey and his intention, and in specific his intentions behind it, his own life, but then that of his crew, and the journey itself. The ongoings, the regularities. And then finally becomes a narrator for Victor Frankenstein. These sets within sets is not only an ideal form of characterization by way of participants in the world, but of weaving together what would otherwise be entirely disparate elements, ongoings, concourses. Weaving not just a chronicle of a single perspective, but an entire world of individuals which make aggregates that bind into totalities. All right. And now, Chapter 15. Such was... Well, let's get back into it. Warm back up with some more hot tea. Enjoying a bit of gunpowder green with spearmint for anyone interested. Such was the history of my beloved cottagers. That was a little too flat. Let's try that again. Such was the history of my beloved cottagers. It impressed me deeply. I learned from the views of social life which it developed to admire their virtues and to deprecate the vices of mankind. And another card. Well, we're not at the pace of needing to quit, but I hope it doesn't pick up. As yet, I looked upon crime as a distant evil. Benevolence and generosity were ever present before me, inciting within me a desire to become an actor in the busy scene where so many admirable qualities were called forth and displayed. But in giving an account of the progress of my intellect, I must not omit a circumstance which occurred in the beginning of the month of August of the same year. One night, during my accustomed visit to the neighboring wood, where I collected my own food and brought home firing for my protectors, I found on the ground a leathern portmanteau containing several articles of dress and some books. I eagerly seized the prize and returned with it to my hovel. Fortunately, the books were written in the language, the elements of which I had acquired at the cottage. They consisted of Paradise Lost, a volume of Plutarch's Lives, and the Sorrows of Werther. The possession of these treasures gave me extreme delight. I now continually studied and exercised my mind upon these histories, whilst my friends were employed in their ordinary occupations. I can hardly describe to you the effects of these books. They produced in me an infinity of new images and feelings that sometimes raised me to ecstasy, but more frequently sunk me into the lowest dejection. In the Sorrows of Werther, besides the interest of its simple and affecting story, so many opinions are canvassed, and so many lights thrown upon what had hitherto been to me obscure subjects, that I found in it a never-ending source of speculation and astonishment. The gentle and domestic manners it described, combined with the lofty sentiments and feelings, which had for their object something out of self, accorded well with my experience among my protectors, and with the wants which were forever alive in my own bosom. But I thought Werther himself a more divine being than I had ever beheld or imagined. His character contained no pretension, but it sunk deep. The disquisitions upon death and suicide were calculated to fill me with wonder, I did not pretend to enter into the merits of the case, yet I inclined towards the opinions of the hero, whose extinction I wept without precisely understanding it. As I read, however, I applied much personally to my own feelings and condition. I found myself similar, yet at the same time strangely unlike to the beings concerning to whom I read, and to whose conversation I was a listener. I sympathized with, and partly understood them, but I was unformed in mind. I was dependent on none, and related to none. The path of my departure was free, and there was none to lament my annihilation. My person was hideous, and my stature gigantic. What did this mean? Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? What was my destination? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. The volume of Plutarch's Lives, which I possessed, contained the histories of the first founders of the ancient republics. This book had a far different effect upon me from the sorrows of Werther. I had learned from Werther's imaginations despondency and gloom, but Plutarch taught me high thoughts. He elevated me above the wretched sphere of my own reflections, to admire and love the heroes of past ages. Many things I read surpassed my understanding and experience. I had a very confused knowledge of kingdoms, wide extents of country, mighty rivers, and boundless seas. But I was perfectly unacquainted with towns and large assemblages of men. The cottage of my protectors had been the only school in which I studied human nature, but this book developed new and mightier scenes of action. I read of men concerned in public affairs, governing or massacring their species. I felt the great ardor for virtue rise within me, and abhorrence for vice, as far as I understood the signification of those terms, relative as they were, as I applied them to pleasure and pain alone. Induced by these feelings, I was of course led to admire peaceable lawgivers, Numa, Solon, and Lycurgus. I feel like I might be mispronouncing that. If that's Greek, that's probably the right way to do it, but I know not. Let's find out. I'm rather certain about the other ones, but... It's a borrowing from ancient Greek. Imagine that. Brought into Latin, I should specify. And let's see, what is the appropriate pronunciation? Yep, that's what I thought. The Romans like to pronounce C's as K's. And while I'm here, I might as well check the others too. Salon, I was right there. And I'm quite certain about Numa. Numa, Solon, and Lycurgus, in preference to Romulus and Theseus. The patriarchal lives of my protectors caused these impressions to take a firm hold on my mind. Perhaps if my first introduction to humanity had been made by a young soldier, burning for glory and slaughter, I should have been imbued with different sensations. But Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. I read it as I had read the other volumes which had fallen into my hands as a true history. It moved every feeling of wonder and awe that the picture of an omnipotent God warring with his creatures was capable of exciting. I often referred the several situations, as their similarity struck me, to my own. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God, a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his Creator. He was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of a superior nature, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. Another circumstance strengthened and confirmed these feelings. Soon after my arrival in the hovel, I discovered some papers in the pocket of the dress which I had taken from your laboratory. At first, I had neglected them, but now that I was able to decipher the characters in which they were written, I began to study them with diligence. It was your journal of the 4 months that preceded my creation. You minutely described in these papers every step you took in the progress of your work. This history was mingled with the accounts of domestic occurrences. You, doubtless, recollect these papers. You, doubtless, recollect these papers. Here they are. Everything is related in them which bears reference to my accursed origin. The whole detail of that series of disgusting circumstances which produced it is set in view. The minutest description of my odious and loathsome person is given in language which painted your own horrors and rendered mine indelible. I sickened as I read. Hateful day when I received life, I exclaimed in agony. Accursed creator! Why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God, in pity, made man beautiful and alluring after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred. These were the reflections of my hours of despondency and solitude. But when I contemplated the virtues of the cottagers, their amiable and benevolent dispositions, I persuaded myself that when they should become acquainted with my admiration of their virtues, they would compassionate me and overlook my personal deformity. Could they turn from their door one, however monstrous, who solicited their compassion and friendship? I resolved at least not to despair, but in every way to fit myself for an interview with them which would decide my fate. I postponed this attempt for some months longer, for the importance attached to its success inspired me with a dread lest I should fail. Besides, I found that my understanding improved so much with every day's experience that I was unwilling to commence this undertaking until a few more months should have added to my sagacity. Several changes in the meantime took place in the cottage. The presence of Safie diffused happiness among its inhabitants, and I also found that a greater degree of plenty reigned there. Felix and Agatha spent more time in amusement and conversation, and were assisted in their labors by servants. They did not appear rich, but they were contented and happy. Their feelings were serene and peaceful, while mine became every day more tumultuous. Increase of knowledge only discovered to me more clearly what a wretched outcast I was. I cherished hope, it is true, but it vanished when I beheld my person reflected in water, or my shadow in the moonshine, even as that frail image and that inconstant shade. I endeavored to crush these fears, and to fortify myself for the trial which in a few months I resolved to undergo, and sometimes I allowed my thoughts, unchecked by reason, to ramble in the fields of paradise, and dared to fancy amiable and lovely creatures, sympathizing with my feelings and cheering my gloom. Their angelic countenances breathed smiles of consolation. But it was all a dream. No Eve soothed my sorrows, nor shared my thoughts. I was alone. I remembered Adam's supplication to his Creator, but where was mine? He had abandoned me, and in the bitterness of my heart, I cursed him. Autumn passed thus. I saw with surprise and grief the leaves decay and fall, and nature again assumed the barren and bleak appearance it had worn when I first beheld the woods and the lovely moon. Yet I did not heed the bleakness of the weather. I was better fitted by my conformation for the endurance of cold than heat. But my chief delights were the sight of the flowers, the birds, and all the gay apparel of summer. When those deserted me, I turned with more attention towards the cottagers. When those deserted me, I turned with more attention towards the cottagers. Their happiness was not decreased by the absence of summer. They loved and sympathized with one another, and their joys, depending on each other, were not interrupted by the casualties that took place around them. The more I saw of them, the greater became my desire to claim their protection and kindness. Yet my heart yearned to be known and loved by these amiable creatures, to see their sweet looks directed towards me with affection, was the utmost limit of my ambition. I dared not think that they would turn them from me with disdain and horror. The poor that stopped at their front door were never driven away. The poor that stopped at their door were never driven away. I asked, it is true, for greater treasures than a little food or rest. I required kindness and sympathy, but I did not believe myself utterly unworthy of it. The winter advanced, and an entire revolution of the seasons had taken place since I awoke into life. My attention at this time was solely directed towards my plan of introducing myself into the cottage of my protectors. I revolved many projects, but that on which I finally fixed was to enter the dwelling when the blind old man should be alone. I had sagacity enough to discover that the unnatural hideousness of my person Cold weather, man. Was the chief object of horror with those who had formerly beheld me. My voice, although harsh, had nothing terrible in it. I thought, therefore, that if in the absence of his children I could gain the goodwill and mediation of the old de Lacy, I might, by his means. I thought, therefore, that if in the absence of his children I could gain the goodwill and mediation of the old de Lacy, I might, by his means, be tolerated by my younger protectors. One day, when the sun shone on the red leaves that strewed the ground and diffused cheerfulness, although it denied warmth, Safie, Agatha, and Felix departed on a long country walk, and the old man, at his own desire, was left alone in the cottage. When his children had departed, he took up his guitar and played several mournful but sweet airs, more sweet and mournful than I had ever heard him play before. At first, his countenance was illuminated with pleasure, but, as he continued, thoughtfulness and sadness succeeded. At length, laying aside the instrument, he sat absorbed in reflection. My heart beat quick. This was the hour and moment of trial, which would decide my hopes or realize my fears. The servants were gone to a neighboring fair. All was silent in and around the cottage. It was an excellent opportunity, yet, when I proceeded to execute my plan, my limbs failed me, and I sank to the ground. Again I rose, and exerting all the firmness of which I was master, removed the planks which I had placed before my hovel to conceal my retreat. The fresh air revived me, and, with renewed determination, I approached the door of their cottage. I knocked. "Who is there?" said the old man. "Come in." I entered. "Pardon this intrusion," said I. "I am a traveler in want of a little rest. You would greatly oblige me if you would allow me to remain a few minutes before the fire." "Enter," said de Lacy, "and I will try in what manner I can relieve your wants. But unfortunately, my children are from home, and, as I am blind, I am afraid I shall find it difficult to procure food for you." "Do not trouble yourself, my kind host. I have food. It is warmth and rest only that I need." I sat down, and a silence ensued. I knew that every minute was precious to me, yet I remained irresolute in what manner to commence the interview when the old man addressed me. By your language, stranger, I suppose you are my countrymen. Are you French? No, but I was educated by a French family, and understand that language only. I am now going to claim the protection of some friends whom I sincerely love, and whose favor I have some hopes. Bloody cars. Eh, we've been busier, I suppose, and yet carried on. Sometime today, anyway. Well, in the meantime, we can check over. And whereabouts are we? Not doing too bad. And finally, they passed. Are they Germans? No, they are French. No, they are French. But let us change the subject. I am an unfortunate and deserted creature. I look around, and I have no relation or friends upon earth. These amiable people to whom I go have never seen me. And know little of me. I'm full of fears, for if I fail there, I am an outcast in the world forever. Do not despair. To be friendless is indeed to be unfortunate, but the hearts of men, when unprejudiced by any obvious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. Rely, therefore, on your hopes, and if these friends are good and amiable, do not despair. They are kind. They are the most excellent creatures in the world, but unfortunately, they are prejudiced against me. I have good dispositions. My life has been hitherto harmless, and in some degree beneficial, but a fatal prejudice clouds their eyes, and where they ought to see a feeling and kind friend, they behold only a detestable monster. That is indeed unfortunate, but if you are really blameless, cannot you undeceive them? I am about to undertake that task, and it is on that account that I feel so many overwhelming terrors. I tenderly love these friends. I have, unknown to them, been for many months in the habits of daily kindness towards them, but they believe that I wish to injure them, and it is that prejudice which I wish to overcome. Where do these friends reside? Near this spot. The old man paused and then continued. If you will unreservedly confide to me the particulars of your tale, I perhaps may be of use in undeceiving them. I am blind and cannot judge of your countenance, but there is something in your words which persuades me that you are sincere. I am poor and an exile, but it will afford me true pleasure to be in any way serviceable to a human creature. Excellent man! I thank you and accept your generous offer. You raise me from the dust by this kindness, and I trust that by your aid I shall not be driven from the society and sympathy of your fellow creatures. Heaven forbid, even if you were really criminal, for that can only drive you to desperation, and not instigate you to virtue. I am also unfortunate. I and my family have been condemned, although innocent. Judge, therefore, if I do not feel for your misfortunes. How can I thank you, my best and only benefactor? From your lips first have I heard the voice of kindness directed towards me. I shall be forever grateful, and your present humanity assures me of success with those friends whom I am on the point of meeting. May I know the names and residence of those friends? I paused. This, I thought, was the moment of decision, which was to rob me of or bestow happiness on me forever. I struggled vainly for firmness sufficient to answer him, but the effort destroyed all my remaining strength. I sank on the chair and sobbed aloud. At that moment, I heard the steps of my younger protectors. And another car. Man. It's so near the end of the chapter, too. I struggled vainly for firmness sufficient to answer him, but the effort destroyed all my remaining strength. I sank on the chair and sobbed aloud. At that moment, I heard the steps of my younger protectors. I had not a moment to lose, but seizing the hand of the old man, I cried, "Now is the time! Save and protect me! You and your family are the friends whom I seek! Do not you desert me in the hour of trial! Do not you desert me in the hour of trial!" "Great God!" exclaimed the old man. "Who are you?" At that instant the cottage door was opened, and Felix, Safie, and Agatha entered. Who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me? Agatha fainted, and Safie, unable to attend to her friend, rushed out of the cottage. Felix darted forward, and with supernatural force tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung. In a transport of fury, he dashed me to the ground, and struck me violently with a stick. I could have torn him limb from limb as the lion rends the antelope, but my heart sunk within me, as with bitter sickness, and I refrained. I saw him on the point of repeating his blow, when, overcome by pain and anguish, I quitted the cottage, and in the general tumult escaped unperceived to my hovel. Chapter 15 picks up with Frankenstein's monster seeing not just through the lens of Sapphi, having went through the tumult of her experience, having went through the tumult of her father's false sentencing by the French government, but books, understood, read, and understood by him for the first time in his entire existence. Not simply observing the ongoings and histories, the language and learning of his fellows, of his fellow family, of his fellow observed, of his fellows observed, but of great masses of people, towns, cities, organizations, faith, and the deepest of human miseries. From three classics of the ages. Granting him enough strength that the desire to become acquainted with his protectors, that the desire to become acquainted with his neighbors gains so much solidity that he makes not only a plan, but follows through on it. He cast himself upon the mercy of the old man de Lacy. While the rest of the household was gone, and began laying out the groundwork of his appeals. Only then, for the return of some of the for the return of de Lacy's children to interrupt, and for that groundwork to be dashed in the haste of a grand call to aid. And in that catastrophic appeal, and in that catastrophic call, to be cast down in suspicion, in loathing for his form, to be beaten and rejected, only to find his way back to the hovel from which he crawled. No longer questioning what he is, how he is, or why. His origins, his nature, and his end. Now all but cemented within him. And so with the greatest of despondency and wrath at his circumstance. Chapter 15 captures more than any other the state of being the other. That which, above all else, is excluded from the fold of associates, an organization of social entities. To be, from his very beginnings, demarcated, designated, constructed as that which is not acceptable, which does not fit the mold, which can never be shaped, reshaped, such that those about him who are not like him will ever be able to accept, will ever be able to integrate him. And as a consequence, he is always firmly rooted in the position of the etic, that which is permanently without, while able to reflect the imic, that which is internal to the humanity which holds so much contempt for him. Nevertheless, he will never be of that. He will never be of the human. He will never be never a member of the type, but an emulator of the tokens. And the practical application of this theory stretches far and wide. In any instance where there is the other, in any instance where an entity is described and where an entity is prescribed and proscribed as that which is outside, regardless of any similarities, any essences which are shared. This dynamic is the referent thereof, the object of the occasion. What is happening actually? And I think we have just enough time to perhaps get through this chapter. We shall see, though. Oh yeah, I think we'll be able to get this. Chapter 16. Cursed, cursed creator! Why did I live? Why, in that instant did I not extinguish the spark of existence which you had so wantonly bestowed? And a car, naturally. Why, in that instant, did I not extinguish the spark of existence which you so... Why, in that instant, did I not extinguish the spark of existence which you had so wantonly bestowed? I know not. Despair had not yet taken possession of me. My feelings were those of rage and revenge. I could with pleasure have destroyed the cottage and its inhabitants, and have glutted myself with their shrieks and misery. When night came, I quitted my retreat and wandered in the woods. In another car. And wandered in the woods, and now, no longer restrained by the fear of discovery, I gave vent to my anguish in fearful howlings. I was like a wild beast that had broken the toils, destroying the objects that obstructed me, and ranging through the wood with a stag-like swiftness. Oh, what a miserable night I passed! The cold stars shone in mockery, and the bare trees waved their branches above me. Now and then the sweet voice of a bird burst forth amidst the universal stillness. All save I were at rest or in enjoyment. I, like the arch-fiend, bore a hell within me, and finding myself unsympathized with, wished to tear up the trees, spread havoc and destruction around me, and then to have sat down and enjoyed the ruin. But this was a luxury of sensation that I could not endure. I became fatigued with excess of bodily exertion, and sank on the damp grass in the sick impotence of despair. There was none among the myriads of men that existed who would pity or assist me. And should I feel kindness towards my enemies? No. From that moment, I declared everlasting war against the species, and more than all, against him who had formed me, and sent me forth to this insupportable misery. The sun rose. I heard the voices of men, and knew that it was impossible to return to my retreat during that day. Accordingly, I hid myself in some thick underwood, determining to devote the ensuing hours to reflection on my situation. The pleasant sunshine and the pure air of day restored me to some degree of tranquillity, and when I considered what had passed at the cottage, I could not help believing that I had been too hasty in my conclusions. I had certainly acted imprudently. It was apparent that my conversation had interested the father in my behalf, and I was a fool in having exposed my person to the horror of his children. I ought to have familiarized the old de Lacy to me, and by degrees to have discovered himself to the rest of his family. and by degrees to have discovered myself to the rest of his family, when they should have been prepared for my approach. But I did not believe my errors to be irretrievable, and after much consideration, I resolved to return to the cottage, and seek the old man, and by my representations win him to my party. These thoughts calmed me, and in the afternoon I sank into a profound sleep. But the fever of my blood did not allow me to be visited by peaceful dreams. The horrible scene of the preceding day was forever acting before my eyes. The females were flying, and the enraged Felix tearing me from his father's feet. I awoke, exhausted, and finding that it was already night. I crept forth from my hiding place and went in search of food. When my hunger was Oof. When my hunger was appeased, I directed my steps towards the well-known path that conducted to the cottage. All there was at peace. I crept into my hovel and remained in silent expectation of the accustomed hour when the family arose. That hour passed, the sun mounted high in the heavens, but the cottagers did not appear. I trembled violently, apprehending some dreadful misfortune. The inside of the cottage was dark, and I heard no motion. I cannot describe the agony of this suspense. Presently, 2 countrymen passed by, but, pausing near the cottage, they entered into conversation, using violent gesticulations. But I did not understand what they said, as they spoke the language of the country, which differed from that of my protectors. Soon after, however, Felix approached with another man. I was surprised, as I knew that he had not quitted the cottage that morning, and waited anxiously to discover, from his discourse, the meaning of these unusual appearances. "Do you consider," said his companion to him, "that you will be obliged to pay 3 months' rent and to lose the produce of your garden? I do not wish to take any unfair advantage, and I beg, therefore, that you will take some days to consider of your determination." "It is utterly useless," replied Felix. "We can never again inhabit your cottage. The life of my father is in the greatest danger, owing to the dreadful circumstance that I have related. My wife and my sister will never recover their horror. I entreat you not to reason with me any more. Take possession of your tenement, and let me fly from this place." Felix trembled violently as he said this. And just in time for another car. Let's correct that tone. "It is utterly useless," replied Felix. "We can never again inhabit your cottage. The life of my father is in the greatest danger, owing to the dreadful circumstance that I have related. My wife and my sister will never recover their horror. I entreat you not to reason with me any more. Take possession of your tenement, and let me fly from this place." Felix trembled violently as he said this. He and his companion entered the cottage, in which they remained for a few minutes, and then departed. I never saw any of the family of de Lacy more. I continued for the remainder of the day in my hovel in a state of utter and stupid despair. My protectors had departed, and had broken the only link that held me to the world. For the first time the feelings of revenge and hatred filled my bosom, and I did not strive to control them, but allowing myself to be borne away by the stream, I bent my mind towards injury and death. When I thought of my friends, of the mild voice of de Lacy, the gentle eyes of Agatha, and the exquisite beauty of the Arabian, these thoughts vanished, and a gush of tears somewhat soothed me. But again, when I reflected that they had spurned and deserted me, anger returned, a rage of anger, and unable to injure anything human, I turned my fury towards inanimate objects. As night advanced, I placed a variety of combustibles around the cottage, and after having destroyed every vestige of cultivation in the garden, I waited with forced impatience until the moon had sunk to commence my operations. As the night advanced, a fierce wind arose from the woods, and quickly dispersed the clouds that had loitered in the heavens. The blast tore along like a mighty avalanche, and produced a kind of insanity in my spirits that burst all bounds of reason and reflection. I lighted the dry branch of a tree, and danced with fury around the devoted cottage, my eyes still fixed on the western horizon, the edge of which the moon nearly touched. A part of its orb was at length hid, and I waved my brand. It sunk, and with a loud scream I fired the straw, and heath, and bushes which I had collected. The wind fanned the fire, and the cottage was quickly enveloped by the flames which clung to it, and licked it with their forked and destroying tongues. As soon as I was convinced that no assistance could save any part of the habitation, I quitted the scene and sought for refuge in the woods. And now, with the world before me, whither should I bend my steps? I resolved to fly far from the scene of my misfortunes, but to me, hated and despised, every country must be equally horrible. At length, the thought of you crossed my mind. I learned from your papers that you were my father, my creator, and to whom could I apply with more fitness than to him who had given me a life? Among the lessons that Felix had bestowed, Among the lessons that Felix had bestowed upon Safie, geography had not been omitted. I had learned from these the relative situations of the different countries of the earth. You had mentioned Geneva as the name of your native town, and towards this place I resolved to proceed. But how was I to direct myself? Well, at least they've got good bass in their car. But how was I to direct myself? I knew that I must travel in a southwesterly direction to reach my destination, but the sun was my only guide. I did not know the names of the towns that I was to pass through, nor could I ask information from a single human being. But I did not despair. From you only could I hope for succor, although towards you I felt no sentiment but that of hatred. Unfeeling, heartless creator, you had endowed me with perceptions, and passions, and then cast me abroad an object for the scorn and horror of mankind. But on you only had I any claim for pity and redress, and from you I determined to seek that justice which I vainly attempted to gain from any other being that wore the human form. My travels were long, and the sufferings I endured intense. It was late in autumn when I quitted the district where I had so long resided. I traveled only at night, fearful of encountering the visage of a human being. Nature decayed around me, and the sun became heatless. Rain and snow poured around me. Mighty rivers were frozen. The surface of the earth was hard and chill and bare, and I found no shelter. Oh, earth! How often did I imprecate curses on the cause of my being? The mildness of my nature had fled, and all within me was turned to gall and bitterness. The nearer I approached to your habitation, the more deeply did I feel the spirit of revenge enkindled in my heart. Snow fell, and the waters were hardened, but I rested not. A few incidents now and then directed me, and I possessed a map of the country, but I often wandered wide from my path. The agony of my feelings allowed me no respite. No incident occurred from which my rage and misery could not extract its food. But a circumstance that happened when I arrived on the confines of Switzerland, when the sun had recovered its warmth, and the earth again began to look green, confirmed in an especial manner the bitterness and horror of my feelings. I generally rested during the day, and traveled only when I was secured by night from the view of man. One morning, however, finding that my path lay through a deep wood, I ventured to continue my journey after the sun had risen. The day, which was one of the first of spring, cheered even me by the loveliness of its sunshine and the balminess of the air. I felt emotions of gentleness and pleasure that had long appeared dead revive within me. Half surprised by the novelty of these sensations, I allowed myself to be borne away by them, and forgetting my solitude and deformity, dared to be happy. Soft tears again bedewed my cheeks, and I even raised my humid eyes. Well, I'm glad this is the last chapter for the day. Fucker. Soft tears again bedewed my cheeks, and I even raised my humid eyes with thankfulness towards the blessed sun, which bestowed such joy upon me. I continued to wind among the paths of the wood until I came to its boundary, which was skirted by a deep and rapid river, into which many of the trees bent their branches, now budding with the fresh spring. Here I paused, not exactly knowing what path to pursue, when I heard the sound of voices that induced me to conceal myself under the shade of a cypress. I was scarcely hid when a young girl came running towards the spot where I was concealed, laughing as if she ran from someone in sport. She continued her course along the precipitous sides of the river, when suddenly her foot slipped, and she fell into the rapid stream. I rushed from my hiding place, and with extreme labor from the force of the current, saved her, and dragged her to shore. She was senseless, and I endeavored by every means in my power to restore animation, when I was suddenly interrupted by the approach of a rustic, who was probably the person from whom she had playfully fled. On seeing me, he darted towards me, and tearing the girl from my arms, hastened towards the deeper parts of the wood. I followed speedily, I hardly knew why, but when the man saw me draw near, he aimed a gun, which he carried at my body, and fired. I sunk to the ground, and my injurer, with swiftness, escaped into the wood. This was then the reward of my benevolence. I had saved a human being from destruction, and as a recompense, I now writhed under the miserable pain of a wound which shattered the flesh and bone. The feelings of kindness and gentleness which I had entertained but a few moments before gave place to hellish rage and gnashing of teeth. Inflamed by pain, I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind. But the agony of my wound overcame me. My pulses paused, and I fainted. For some weeks, I led a miserable life in the woods, endeavoring to cure the wound which I had received. The ball had entered my shoulder, and I knew not whether it had remained there or passed through. At any rate, I had no means of extracting it. I had no means of extracting it. My sufferings were augmented also by the oppressive sense of the injustice and ingratitude of their infliction. My daily vows rose for revenge, a deep and deadly revenge, such as would alone compensate for the outrages and anguish I had endured. After some weeks, my wound healed, and I continued my journey. The labors I endured were no longer to be alleviated by the bright sun or gentle breezes of spring. All joy was but a mockery, which insulted my desolate state, and made me feel more painfully that I was not made for the enjoyment of pleasure. But my toils now drew near a close, and in 2 months from this time I reached the environs of Geneva. It was evening when I arrived, and I retired to a hiding place among the fields that surround it, to meditate in what manner I should apply to you. I was oppressed by fatigue and hunger, and far too unhappy to enjoy the gentle breezes of evening, or the prospect of the sun setting behind the stupendous mountains of Jura. At this time, a slight sleep relieved me from the pain of reflection, which was disturbed by the approach of a beautiful child, who came running into the recess I had chosen with all the sportiveness of infancy. Suddenly, as I gazed on him, an idea seized me that this little creature was unprejudiced, and had lived too short a time to have imbibed a horror of deformity. If, therefore, I could seize him and educate him as my companion and friend, I should not be so desolate in this peopled earth. Urged by this impulse, I seized on the boy as he passed, and drew him towards me. As soon as he beheld my form, he placed his hands before his eyes, and uttered a shrill scream. I drew his hand forcibly from his face, and said, "Child, what is the meaning of this? I do not intend to hurt you. Listen to me." He struggled violently. "Let me go!" he cried. "Monster! Ugly wretch! You wish to eat me and tear me to pieces! You are an ogre! Let me go, or I will tell my papa." "Boy, you will never see your father again. You must come with me." "Hideous monster! Let me go. My papa is a syndic. He is Monsieur Frankenstein. He will punish you. You dare not keep me." "Frankenstein? You belong then to my enemy, to him towards whom I have sworn eternal revenge. You shall be my first victim." The child still struggled, and loaded me with epithets which carried despair to my heart. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. I gazed on my victim, and my heart swelled with exultation and hellish triumph. Clapping my hands, I exclaimed, I, too, can create desolation. My enemy is not invulnerable. This death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him. As I fixed my eyes on the child, I saw something glittering on his breast. I took it. It was a portrait of a most lovely woman. In spite of my malignity, it softened and attracted me. For a few moments, I gazed with delight on her dark eyes, fringed by deep lashes, and her lovely lips. But presently my rage returned. I remembered that I was forever deprived of the delights that such beautiful creatures could bestow, and that she whose resemblance I contemplated would, in regarding me, have changed that air of divine benignity to one expressive of disgust and affright. Can you wonder that such thoughts transported me with rage? I only wonder that at that moment, instead of venting my sensations in exclamations and agony, I did not rush among mankind and perish in the attempt to destroy them. While I was overcome by these feelings, I left the spot where I had committed the murder, and seeking a more secluded hiding place, I entered a barn which had appeared to me to be empty. A woman was sleeping on some straw. She was not young, not indeed so beautiful as her whose portrait I held, but of an agreeable aspect, and blooming in the loveliness of youth and health. Here, I thought, is one of those whose joy-imparting smiles are bestowed on all but me. And then I bent over her and whispered, Awake, fairest, thy lover is near. He who would give his life but to obtain one look of affection from thine eyes. My beloved, awake! The sleeper stirred. A thrill of terror ran through me. Should she indeed awake and see me and curse me and denounce the murderer? Thus would she assuredly act if her darkened eyes opened and she beheld me. The thought was madness. It stirred the fiend within me. Not I, but she shall suffer the murder I have committed because I am forever robbed of all that she could give me. She shall atone. The crime had its source in her. Be hers the punishment. Thanks to the lessons of Felix and the sanguinary laws of man, I had learned now to work mischief. I bent over her and placed the portrait securely in one of the folds of her dress. She moved again, and I fled. For some days I haunted the spot where these scenes had taken place, sometimes wishing to see you, sometimes resolved to quit the world and its miseries forever. At length I wandered towards these mountains, and have ranged through their immense recesses, consumed by a burning passion which you alone can gratify. We may not part until you have promised to comply with my requisition. I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being you must create. Hmm. Chapter 16 contains the dread. Contains the condemnation of Frankenstein's monster. After all of the promise that wisdom and learning had imbued him with, after all of the familiarity that he had sought to bear with the family that he grew alongside, with every single repeated attempt to be kind, to be amiable, to be worthy of those humans about him, he received not but physic injury, emotional trauma. And psychologic corruption. Just as he had been shown so many of the pleasures and delights of humankind, so too had he been detailed the worst. The privations. Dreads. Isolations. And above all, condemnations. And so, one who has been rejected by his village, and so one who has been rejected by his peoples, has taken to their home to set it alight, at least so that he may feel the warmth. Wandering from the forests of Ingolstadt, he crosses his way overnight into the forests of Geneva in Switzerland. And thereabouts finds a youth which he had hoped to bring up not to loathe him for no other reason than his mere appearance. But that boy let slip a detail that would guarantee his most grisly end. That he is a relative of Victor Frankenstein, and therefore he paid. He shall pay the most fearsome toll for the misery, for the recompense upon Victor himself. The Creator who bestowed this monstrosity not but the highest capacities for firmity, and the most dashed hopes for companionship, and worse than that, of outright war declared upon his very existence, simply for the sake of it. Where Victor had his time, where Victor had his story explaining his slow decline into the madness of fixation, his creation has inherited the same fate. That of withering away from the peak of glorious potential, of the uttermost unsoiled and compassionate opportunity, to that of the most soiled and irretrievable diabolisms. '16 shows us not only how continual, violent, unthinking rejection may produce a villain of high rank, but how one, even without the cooperation and sociality of others, of others in his quest, can find himself divorced from all knowledge to possessing language, then insight, finally intuition, finally intellect, and then exercise that to their own ends. Exercise that to their own ends. That's something as seemingly insignificant as the notes left in the clothes, which the monster took from Frankenstein, which the monster took from Victor, to old-fashioned land navigation, mingled with a little bit of geography that he picked up in passing. And finally, awareness of human relations. Have wrought something truly worthy of the title of monster. Not because of how they... not brought about by their birth. Not brought about as a birthright, but as an attained rank. In a position that only exists for the mindless abnegation bestowed upon him by those who might have embraced him. And now, not too far off our regular schedule, I think that we can call that a wrap for Frankenstein. And with that, let's stretch the legs a little bit, and then, while I'm doing that, get everything pulled up for Amnesia. Perhaps time to refresh our tea a bit. And then hopefully we won't have to record desktop audio this time. But we shall see. No, I think we are in good standing there. But something that does need a bit of work. I need to take a quick recess. So, within about, I would say 2 minutes, we should return and dig in. Hey, not too bad of a lineup. Let's straighten that just a teeny tiny bit, and there we go. All right. Now, we will need a bit of adjustment before we hop into it, because I had noticed whenever I was editing this last time that apparently the game had been a wee little bit, just barely, peeking the bar at the top, which is a consequence of it not being full screen. I now understand. I thought that might have just been an artifact on my side, but no, it's apparently in the recording too. So, let's see. That looks like it fixed it up. And there's that interesting thing about Amnesia. Let's see. Are we recording the game? Perfect. Glad the audio's cooperating with us today. It doesn't like to run on full screen, at least on my rig. That might be because I have two monitors, it might be for some other reason, but I'm not sure. Now, I do recall we were at a point where we had just entered the morgue, right? And directly into it we go. Oh! I actually took the time to render rats. But no rubber room. For now. We'll see how that holds up. It has been said many a time that they do make me crazy.
What happened? Why are all these dead? Where am I? What's happening?
Somewhere in Pleasant, that's for sure. Yeah. I don't think that that help ever quite came. Back to back.
3 days now. This is ridiculous. Items and someone in this room. Hey! Anybody? Am I all alone here?
Hey!
I'm so tired. If I sleep, will I wake from this nightmare? If not, I pray my heavenly Father will take me in my sleep.
Considering the bone saw, I don't think that was quite the fate he shared. But aside from the delivery of that line, hey! Why won't anybody hear me? What immediately flooded my recollection was some bits from the Legend of Avantras channel. If anybody out there enjoys listening to their hijinks. Oh, I can't show that. Cheeks are fine, but that's too much.
Daniel, do you hear me? Have you changed your mind?
Did he really just telepath me? I don't see any dialogue options, so I guess that renders our choice clear. But anywho, I've been going through the Once Upon a Witchlight campaign thus far, and I'm at the point where Gricko, the goblin character, got stuck in a meat locker. And the parody is just too funny. I fear for Daniel, for he is reckless. He is tainted by the approaching shadow. will not be able to pass the gate. Will he be able to accept this in the end? My love, I've seen evil in him. How am I to trust him with the truth? What cruel irony that I have to do unto him what Agrippa did unto me. Oof, that's concerning. Why don't you just have that lying around? Another memory canister that you would leave with concerns and considerations? I guess they didn't expect me to ever come here. But, as they say, ooh, Daniel is reckless. Vaccine trials. The vaccine enabling my men to work in the fungi-ridden sewer is a definite success. Unfortunately, only a few of the servants have been remedied, as the procedure proved difficult. The others will perish, and eventually I will have to create more of them to keep my experiments running. Creating servants. Intriguing. Note that an injection of vaccinated blood will work as a shield long enough to pass the sewers without any risk of infection. It will do fine for prisoner transport. Well, perhaps that's what this needle is for. Try not to show as much dingle-dangle as I can. Oh, I'm missing something. Probably a vessel for it. But we do have this note. Plague outbreak. The strange deaths among the servants and prisoners have finally been resolved. It seems that the drain sewer, which has recently been opened up for use as a means of transport, is plagued by a peculiar poisonous fungi. The victims seem to have suffered an extremely quick outbreak of sickness affecting the entire body. Some of my men, including myself, are blissfully spared by this calamity, but it is clear that this cripples my progress. The prisoners die quickly, and the contaminated vitae lacks the energy I seek. I shall immediately start working on a vaccine. There's more of that vitae again. Now, I have went out of my way to avoid as many spoilers as I can, which thankfully happens to include not reflecting very much upon... Oh, I hope this isn't the fungi chamber. That cloud will probably hurt me if I step in it. But hearing that term vitae... Interesting that it's in the plural. I guess there's... It's just the pain chamber. Okay. Another stack. Damn, he had an awful lot of poor unfortunates down here. I thought that these were morgue slots whenever I was seeing them earlier. Oh, I guess it's too dark in here for poor Danielle. Or am I getting fungified, I guess? Yes? That's the idea. What am I missing, then? Ah, to what I was starting on a few moments ago. I'm coming to understand and anticipate that this is literally essence. I think that I might have been a little closer in my jests than I originally thought. Whenever I described them trying to drain the person juice out of people. Specifically out of their souls. Is there something in the stack of bodies that I'm in need of? No, I guess not. Ooh. Glad I got some of that. Wait a minute. Maybe I have everything I need. Surely. Oh. Drill? If you can use a drill, you can use a drill. We know this. Ah, okay, so that's for the injection. Tube them up, baby. Now for the jar. Well, surely it's... Surely I don't literally just inject brain juice into my arm. Well, I guess we'll find out. What madman would think, ah yes, I need a vaccine for some fungal plague. What's the solution? I gotta drill his skull open and then inject the mind gloop directly into my arm. At least I hope it was his arm. It could be somewhere even less pleasant. I can't take any of that back, can I? Oh, you're telling me that I could, like, splish splash in some acid, gloop some gore, even swim around in my blood fountain, but injecting a little bit more of his think pan is too much? Alright. And did that break the drill? Wow, I guess it did. That's crazy. Well, this shouldn't make me sick anymore. And so it doesn't, I suppose. It is a wonder that with all the decomposition, such that there's literal stank lines coming off of these piles, they didn't have any kind of explosion thus far. But these really were just here for style? Story points? I respect it, but I surely would think that there's something stashed in here. Oh well, back to the— oh, hell. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Into the corner, stealth archery style. I guess I could stand under the light. Sounds like he's going for the opposite door. See if we can peek through. You are an angry lad, aren't you? Ooh, boy! We better get the fuck up out of here! Holy shit, that is not good! I hope this is the right corner. Yep, looks like it. Bye-bye! Bye, have a beautiful time! Whew. They're gonna follow me too, I guarantee it. This is not a chase that's ended quite yet. Whew. Or not, well that's nice. Cause I bet you couldn't have crossed over here. Now how's our brain? Oh, we're dotting. That's not a good sign. I thought the laudanum helped with the brain. We'll resolve that with more progress. Progress, yes. Great discoveries to be had. Now that we can enjoy inhaling... I bet. Now that we can continue with inhaling all of this delightful fungal air. I guess if the only two options are pain, or, sadness, or anger out of pain, I'd rather take the option of trying to figure out what the hell's going on. Oh, those are the mushrooms! They do dead-ass... Right, I can't stare at them. But they do dead-ass just look like Skyrim mushrooms. Well, after all of this time getting gored and bumbling around in the dark and going through the corpse rooms, I think it's time for his shower. Splish splash, I was taking a bath. Alright, now we're ready to go. That should restore our sanity. That's gonna cause damage if I walk into it.
What's happening? What are you doing? Let me go! Please, don't take me! Nobody ever return!
No, I bet they don't. Not from this place. No, let's hope we don't bump into one of those... not Scream monsters. I'm always hesitant whenever I find a way forward. That's so obvious. I feel as though I should be backtracking so that I don't miss anything. Yeesh. Well. That'll probably be an issue later on. Ah, they got me. They straight up had me. Well, now this is definitely a way forward. Don't know if I should be venturing yet. Pipes! Pipes everywhere! Nice! Glad they have this here. And enough to come back to later. Now, I'd wager this crank will be handy here. I feel as though I shouldn't fiddle with these yet, but I'm going to anyway. Thanks! I hadn't noticed. Two noisy machine lovers? How wild. Well, it certainly increases the... Ah! Okay, this is probably for... that water wheel out there. Well, that sounds like it's the slowest. We'll see. We'll see if that holds and whether I get eaten or not. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. That's no bueno. still standing there? I'm gonna fling this door open and then get eaten. Watch this. Well, congratulations, I lied to you. I have been discovered. Instead, he's around the corner. Not yet, not yet. We'll see. But boy, did he skedaddle after not finding any, viands in the place. No victuals, no sarsaparillas. He said, "Blink, I'm gone." I'm glad to see that my guesses had some alignment. Now I'd wager that over on this side they have another set of letters. I am so glad, in any event, that there is not another water monster come this way. What have we here? Alright. Okay. I didn't think so. Also no. Are you sure? Huh. There's something I can throw at this. Excuse you. Could really try and keep that to himself, but of course not. This is my underground waterway that I claim as a monstrous lair. You're just a guest in it. You have no room to tell me what's what. That so is so. Well, I tell him what. As soon as I find something to bust open this pipe, it's gonna be a world of change. Let's try not to get killed here in that case. Okay. Just... I got... For anybody who has had the interesting circumstance of seeing somebody, like, stick a hand out to touch a moving train or vehicle, I just imagine that's literally what happened. He just grazed with the tips of his fingers and it went, woo! Like getting launched in Gmod. What kind of nonsense? I mean, I'm glad they have the option to let you do dumb shit like that, but... I guess that's what they meant by Daniel being reckless. That it would even be something to consider. Well, it would be mighty convenient if I could knock one of those stones loose and pitch it around. So, the only answer that comes to mind is we've got to play around with these levers some more. Clearly, I did not get the exact right orientation. I mean, that sounds awfully quiet. But it will be a laborious time skittering back and forth if that's not the case. I assume these are gears I'm shifting. Well, this is the quietest insofar as I can tell. Is that a pile of rats? Yuck. Well, I guess there's no better option than to go back and see. Because I don't think that the handle will do anything here. Well, it's certainly slow, but I'm pretty sure this was the speed we were looking at earlier. Well, let's risk it. No. Okay. Well, looks like we can't thread that needle. Manually, anyhow. Then what was the point of being over here? There's, of course, the busted pipe, but not enough that I can do anything with it. They did at least render the material such that it makes a sound. Oh! Oh! Well, that's convenient. I didn't need anything to bust it with anyway. Just raw, unbridled strand. Well, let's see if this will do it. Perfect. My guess is we're good. What have we here? It's supposed to be an abstract flower of sorts? Maybe just a regular charge. Is it, though? Is it impossible to get through? We'll see. Ooh, spooky. Oh! What happened to you, buddy? Yeah? And go where? Methinks not. Oh yeah? Is that how you really feel about it? Well, if you feel that strongly, how about one of these? It's just flops over so flaccidly. Is that a wrap? Is this creature wearing the most rudimentary of clothes? I guess so. Yeah. Yikes. I wonder if the way that these infections, whatever they happen to be, are callbacks to Half-Life with their little danglers that drop down from the ceiling. Or if this was something entirely separate. I definitely recall seeing some demonic reflections in Devil May Cry 1 and 2. Now that I think about it, I don't know. And back into a corner. Do a pirouette! Yeah, it's a dead end. Do some more spins with your ballet foot wraps and get the fuck on with yourself. Now, as I was saying before somebody decided that they were done with this set of bars over here, I do wonder where the idea of a sort of organic contamination came from in that way. Because certainly, as far as I know, there are references to tumors. Maybe not in the understanding of cancer, going all the way back to well before the Common Era. At least in the English translations of the Old Testament, there are direct translations in reference to gold tumors. Now, how accurate that is to the original text, couldn't tell you. But I would imagine there is something there. You really are just in the way, huh? I'll have to find some route around. But that is to say that the idea is not entirely unthinkable. But it is once more something taken for granted, as I was describing with Lovecraft's inputs to all things horror. I wouldn't suspect him to be the origin point of it either. Seems too well baked into things to propose that. Of course, I might be wrong. But that's something I'll have to take a peek at. Alright. Now here's our fall guy. That catch your attention? Yes, excellent. Once a friend, now a foe. As past you, I go, go, go. Ah! Shit! Fuck! God damn it! Oh, man. It has been a long time since a game has made me yell. Shit! Oh, man. I thought he was behind the door. Yoink. Ah, not just a fall guy, but at least at a time, a stand-up guy. Fuck, man. Well, Amnesia did the job that many another could not. I have to give that some really high praise, because that, yes, was a jump scare of sorts, but it did have the appropriate couching intention to make it really feel like it was deserved rather than just Hooga Booga Booga! I'll give it to him. Somebody set this fucking tunnel to vibrate. For this and other reasons, I'm glad that I decided we're gonna continue with this, because I do admit one of the things that made me want to move forward with something of a long play of this is the fact that it had been reputed as a genuinely spooktacular game. And I had been, yeah, caught off guard. A couple of times. But more had they been instances of frustration or my own negligence than I think could be justified of the game itself. The way that it had presented things.
9th of August, 1839. I can't stop sweating and shaking. The warding ritual was not something of a sane mind. I did not even realize the dungeon was still in use. Alexander had his servants bring one of the prisoners, a murderer, he told me. Alexander made all the arrangements, but he said I had to perform the ritual in order to have the right effect. The shadow could be led astray by the blood of another. Killing the man would provide us precious time. What else could I do? Alexander said it had to be done. He is saving my life. I don't have the luxury of argument.
Alright. Well, I guess we are certainly one with our own story, in that case. I'm gonna flip those levers until we know what they're for. Or at least have a vague suggestion. Considering the circumstances, I'm a bit skeptic of whether, it was truly an eye for an eye in that case. Much as I enjoy taking the position of the archetype in pretty much any game that I play, which admits of it, You can't trust wizards, man. At least not whenever they are not playing with every hand in front of you. And if there is anything you can trust the magically inclined to have, it is more than a set of two hands on any given thing.
I need you to stay awake. Can you feel the syringe?
No, I can't feel anything. Alexander,
Yes.
soon I won't even be able to move, will I?
Your life is safe.
I don't doubt that. But will it be worth living?
A question not worth answering at the moment, I guess. Gonna need a crowbar for that bad boy. I feel like a shove would be mighty useful at some point. The lighting tells me that one isn't dead yet. What in the hell? Why would you spike the walls like that? Okay.
Help me. Who's the switch?
Well, I was right, I suppose. Eesh. No getting in there.
Next to me.
Maybe if you tell me what's going on. If I throw a crate at you, will that do anything? Not at all. Nope. I'm not gonna do that before I know what I'm getting into, buckaroo. What? It gives me the option to even begin lifting it? That is incredible. Daniel must be a strong lad. I assume the same with this one. Not getting in there unless I have to. Feels like a great way to get permanently trapped. Now there's gotta be another decanter of oil in here, isn't there? Ah, very good. Precisely what I was hoping for. Yep. Chancel. Feels like a term I should be familiar with. But the sense does not cross my mind. I guess we'll find out here soon enough.
I know this. I've been here already. I know this taste. A taste of Damascus rose obfuscating the truth in a dim haze. They may sweep the traces from my memory, but my body remembers. These cuts speak volumes, even though my mind remains silent. They will be back. They will be back.
I bet they will. Oh no! Smoke! How spooktacular. How galling! How absolutely ensorceling! That was a really well-delivered whimper. I have to praise the voice actor there. There have been some hammy lines thus far, but the little grumbles, groans, and moans of fear, they definitely got. Oh, hello, Agrippa. Do you want some foods? I guess not. Let's heal up while we're here. No. 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 Why is it... Agrippa doesn't need that. I mean, I guess at least that confirms who I suspected him to be.
Please. Next to me.
What? I just realized. What kind of goofy-ass construction does this stair set have? Does this staircase have? Beams running floor to ceiling in a spiral. With cut stone blocks? This thing would not hold up at all. This is like cobblestone that I sincerely doubt has been slathered with enough mortar, or more probably cement, to hold up. Of all of the good places that I've seen put together out of this game yet, this is probably the weakest. All it would have taken is a differing texture. You could have easily made it line up with all of the various... with all of the patterning of the stacked stones about. All it would have taken is, just as we have seen earlier, using more monolithic stones. So that you don't have these tiny little piles that are assumed to be sovereign glued together. But instead, that accounts for the compressive strength that stone requires in order to stay structurally sound. The supports of these wooden beams, first of all, probably would not be enough to even keep their own sections aloft. And besides, would likely look much better with something like stone arches. If there's anything that we can say of Brennenburg Castle, it's that they were not afraid to put cost in a drip. And if you're going to try for the drip of a ginormous spiral staircase to a dungeon for the sake of it, then they aren't gonna try and put something together that's just gonna fall apart. That is a little fault there. Well, now, I suppose that leaves us with... Huh? Oh, okay. Finding out what exactly these levers do. I can find my way back to them anyway. Yes, here we are. Yes, St. Elmo's Fire. Okay. Well, I guess we'll find out what exactly that does at a later time, then. But I'm surely not gonna axe Agrippa yet. Not if I can help it, anyway. Oh, hello. What have we here? I was wondering why we might have so many throwables in this area. And it does explain why we have this, spike here, in case I get a little too sloppy. Well, let's, That's interesting. It seems like the weight of the thing actually slows down your jump. Neat. I didn't think that would work. Keep trying this handle on everything. It'll work eventually, I swear. Oh, we can pull this in. There we go. I was under the impression that what you got is what you got. Now, if only there was a way to manipulate these. I guess I could jump on it from the side like that. Now, what is the idea here? Eventually. Gotta see what this does first. Is this all for naught? Oh, there we go. Ah, there we go. Now let's see what those levers do. I didn't think they would just let me walk off without any resolution in sight. And that standalone unit, presumably an electrifier of some description, didn't seem like it would be the object that would reinitiate them levers. I hope this doesn't kill Agrippa. Or if it does, it at least makes it worth my time.
No, don't kill her.
Ah, the doors. Okay. That must be why I couldn't lift them.
Daniel, you have gone too far. I have to stop you. I can't let you proceed any further. I'm sorry.
Am I taking psychic damage right now, then? What's going on? Oh, well, we've got giant spiders, anyway. I guess that is a concern. Are those sprites? Oh, no, they're actual full 3D renders. Ah. I'm glad that I came to inspect my arachnid friend. Those are some fucking ginormous spiders, man. I'm glad I'm not an arachnophobe, and I'm sorry for anybody who is. Yeah. In time, all good things come. Ooh! Fishy. Have we something here? I can't just leap down in there, can I? Oh, but it would be an interesting way to perish. There's no way back up yet. I'll come back to you in a moment. Or maybe I should just now. Yeah, with that kind of noise, I have to know. They really did let you. Wow. I love this watch your step thing. It pairs well with the tread carefully. Now that didn't change anything, did it? Don't imagine we lost any progress. Well, I guess we at least didn't maintain our spider friends. That's an interesting result. I do wonder if specific deaths impact the outcomes of the game. Yep, he's still begging. I guess that doesn't change, at least. Anything in here? Oop. I wonder if I can pitch anything down, though. What if we do one of these? Not a deep drop, we'll say. About 2 of these. What about 3 of these? And I'll wait till I hear a monstrous churn below. Nada. Okay. I'm sure that'll have some significance later, though. I don't want to leave here yet. Transept. Across the 7? Across through, sometimes beyond. Sept, of course, 7. We are running to the limits of my knowledge of some archaic terms anyway. Ah, yes. Can't forget. Oh, another memory can. Oh boy, like a box of jelly beans. I ain't seen one yet. In court, the Order of the Black Eagles spew their politics at each other while I sit here quietly in place, willfully forgotten. Once in a while, someone will notice me and lose themselves in a silent cower before regaining their senses. They all know that I am the one and the same Alexander who helped their fathers and grandfathers to found this great order. I've seen them take their fathers' places, and they, too, will grow old and pass away, while I remain the same, aged not by time, but by anguish. That's probably the neatest way I have seen it stated, of the gentle diminishing, time over time, of beings which have no limit to their lifespan. Agrippa channels Weir. Weir taunts me from the other side. I trust him with my true reason for how my efforts, and still he still insists on me releasing Agrippa. How an enlightened man can show such lack of compassion in a seat of power disgusts me. I can't bring myself to part from Agrippa as he is, and has been for centuries, my only link to the worlds beyond. Weir claims he tries his best to release me from my banishment, but that he needs me to give him Agrippa first so he too can help. If he could guarantee success, I would happily oblige, but how am I to part from him if my return might be denied? I know what they are capable of. I have seen their deception. Optimism is a most hopeless feeling, but I must retain it. I shall prepare for his release. To release Agrippa without killing him, Weir told me to feed him a tonic made from a paralyzer, vitae, and tempter. The poisonous fungi should work as a paralyzer if I can find the internal gland from a large specimen. The choir seems to be a fertile ground for this sort. I should then be able to extract its contents with the proper tools. The vitae could be extracted as usual from any agonized human victim's blood. I just need large amounts to distill it properly. Remember to collect this during the next torture session. Tempter, on the other hand, will prove more difficult. I don't think it exists in this world. Simply writing the word with these letters looks wrong. I believe it's a property of the secretion in the water-dwelling Karank. I will have to address Weir with this, as he will have to supply me with a host. Also, a properly prepared well should suffice to contain it. I guess that tells us what that is. And a way maybe not to execute the poor man. Though to what end, we shall find out. What time is it? Got about another 30 minutes, and I'm not looking to make this a long one yet. My curiosities are properly raised. Alright, time to go Full Metal Alchemist. Heh.
15th of August, 18...
See, I wasn't kidding.
The blood wards are failing. The shadow beckons, and its cry disarms my actions. Hurry. No time to spare. You have to kill another. Alexander produces a knife. He wants me to cut the flesh. Do it. Save yourself. He is a murderer, Daniel. He is evil. A cold-blooded killer. Hurry.
I mean, he's already here, and this knife does look fucking cool.
You must let me be. I have to concentrate.
Might as well.
Man, cut the lines, cut the flesh.
Watch the blood spill, let it come. Yes, yes, yes. And now that he has the customary glow paint, let's do this.
Please, I didn't do anything. Paint the man, cut the lines. Paint the man, cut the lines. Please.
Oh, man.
Man cries. Now you see.
Yeah, it's a little too late for that one.
Well, one life for another. You hear me, guardian of the orb? I did all this for you. Now, once more, withdraw your shadow from my domain.
Alright. Now, did I get anything?
Alexander, there isn't much time. I can feel it. We must act swiftly. I will do whatever it takes.
Rose petals. How poetic. Now, what did I get? Eh? Vitae, vitae, vitae. Hast thou any vitae? Nay. I went through that entire spirit journey for naught? Eh? Do we have the knife? No, but he is properly ready, I guess. Convenient. Will this do? No. Okay. Come here. And I guess none of these knives will work either, eh? I need a special knife. I need my Vorpal blade. Oh. The bounce, man, the bounce. Like flubber. So you're telling me there's no ceremonial knife that I can pick up in here? No, I guess not. Oh, now we're getting direct story on Daniel's business.
What are my intentions, Daniel? Salvation. It used to be yours, but now you only seek misplaced revenge. How do you justify your violence? Is it for the greater good? Are you doing the world a service? It is you who caused all this pain and death. If you had accepted your fate and submitted to the orb,
Oh, shit. God damn What? Well, I guess that's what it pulled my vision towards. Couldn't see a bloody thing in the vapor. I thought I saw one of you. Some really high fidelity sound effects. With the panning, directional. So that's the baddie that got me. I hope I'm not going towards it. I am happy to see, at least, that we have properly entered a Lovecraftian dimension.
Get her back!
Well, if it's so easy... Yep. Perfect. I really wasn't sure where this was going to trend me towards. Is that a brass bull? Really? Wow, okay. The traitor did not know what to think of the brass bull as he was forced to enter it. Only when the heat of fire began to scorch his skin and cook his flesh did he realize it was to be his tomb. His screams of pain echoed inside the brass chamber and traveled through the complex instrument which was the bull's head. Outside, the men could hear the brazen bull below. What crime, what sin deserves the brazen bull? You dare not ask him if you could. The brazen bull is quite the inspiring symbol of cruelty. Very well in keeping with exactly the sort of behaviorisms just detailed in Frankenstein. Naught but a pure construction intended to bestow agony. Existing purely for the pleasure. Not of the grievous pain of the bearer. But that it comes at the ends of such artifice. That their expense begets utility to artistry.
The wheel is good for keeping your victim still during the procedure. They can be bound around the circumference or simply stretched across, tying limbs to the spokes and rim. All tools are by this point useful, and you may administer the torture in any way you like. But the forte of the wheel is the gaps. When you have decided that the victim shall die, you can smash their limbs with a hammer, making them fold in between the frame.
But they'll die. Too quickly, I mean.
No, don't worry. The human body is much more resilient. They can survive for days until they finally succumb.
The murderer's limbs were tied to the spokes of the wheel. They turned the wheel slowly, but with intent, so the rope secured around his legs stretched and cracked the bone. He no longer had the strength to scream. The two men looked at each other knowingly and took a hammer and struck the victim's chest in a final act of mercy. No better a demonstration of the exact concentration of will to misery. In this case, supposed as a means to power. But then, aren't they all? Even if a potentialless one. Robbed of all function besides power for the sake of power. The lines that I was reciting earlier, probably misquoting, are actually in reflection of a song, quite a heavy metal song in fact, by Golden God. For fans of the genre, I would suggest them. Something I didn't take note of earlier, when I should. Throughout the entire story of Frankenstein's monster, it speaks more to the nature of humanity itself than it does the circumstance that that poor creature was given. Its birthright was shaped from the first moment of its existence by the very fact of how we as living things conduct ourselves. As it is brought to a fictitious apex and given an esoteric flavor here in Amnesia, the notes which are touched upon here are not unfamiliar to reality as well. Nor in the book. Is it so unlike truth? We must be glad as a species that we have nothing which we have created yet that quite has the capacity for sapience, the ability to think, to perceive, to feel, to the same extent and intellectual capacity as we, for we would be miserable begetters, antecessors, were it so. The example they would have to live by is beyond anything we might call monstrous when taken as a whole. I did not plan that. The forger stood absolutely still. The casket had been closed, but a faint light made its way inside. A myriad of spikes pointed at him, glittering as they waited for his body to slip just for a moment. His knee jerked and he felt blood trickle down his leg. In pain, his head fell slightly forward. It took him a while to realize his eye had ruptured and begun to leak. Yep. Iron Maidens, while not historically accurate, are a dreadful concoction that were put together. My understanding is that there was some vessel akin to the shape as seen in these stereotypes, in these stereotypic examples. But that spikes were added to the inside later on, so as to create a seeming exotic illusion to a brutal or otherwise despicable nature. Something to really sell people on as some unscrupulous archaeologists had found their way. Had attempted to make something of a headline for themselves. A worthy find. And I do mean worthy very literally. Okay, so I have been everywhere. Cool. Time to come back from these dark abysses. It was a very interesting, architecturally, and wise gameplay decision to have these bridges here. Not only does it add a sense of grandness on top of the apparently indefinitely stretching pillars to the entire area, but at the same time, since it is a place with a very low draw distance and very indistinct terrain, a waypoint for finding your way to the rest of the level.
She deserved it, that little bitch.
Okie doke, man. Someone's a little bit upset. Wait a minute. Hey, man. Heads up. Where are we at? Got about 9 minutes left. I think I'll just be able to get 1 or 2 more things completed before we call it good for the day. I think the meat that I've collected is probably the key to whatever the Karnak, I think it was called, the well creature, is supposed to have. Oh, I will. Why not? Meat, mysterious meat. For you, a wee treat. Let's put it over there. Now I need something to drop on its head. Not the stone, that's for sure. I really do hope I didn't spoil this. Did that get it? Cool. What have we here? Yikes. Nasty. So we got the bone juice. We got the poison juice. I don't think I went to the transept earlier. Nope, definitely not. Where are we at? Okay, so this is a whole new area to explore, and a beautiful one at that, might I add. But this is obviously going to take a lot more time than is befitting of trying to rush through it here in 6 minutes. So I think that we'll call it a wrap. I think following the theme of everything that I've explored before, and given that we're doing a long play here, we will not make any final notes. It speaks for itself, and between the amount of clips that I will make for highlights and shorts, it'll say everything that I think about it in bulk. So on that note, I think it's time to bring us back over and bid our farewells. On that note, we get all prepped and ready to go. I thank you all for spending time here with me today. If you enjoyed it, I would hope that you find it worthy of a like, share, subscribe, and all of the other accoutrements, to include taking a look down in the description where you can find more of our content and what I get up to in the Discord, the Threefold Edifactory, TikTok, X, Instagram, BitChute, Spotify. And if you think it worthy, we have a Patreon down below, starting at $5 at the proponent tier. You can get a few additional benefits, like exclusive access to a patrons-only section in the Discord server, your name at the end of every piece of long-form content, the ability to participate in channel polls so you can help decide in which direction I go, and the collation of all of our materials in one convenient place. If you think that you might only want to do a one-time donation, at any amount that you desire, there is also a link to Stream Elements where you may do so. Otherwise, I hope that you all never miss your opportunities.